Hello, and welcome to a premium hangout with me, Josh, and Thomas.
Hello.
So we were going to address an ongoing debate about that me and Thomas have been having pretty much constantly since he started working here about whether free markets and morality can coexist. And Thomas is very much on the side of no, and I'm very much on the side of yes. So we're actually going to have a live debate about this. And it'll be good to get people weighing in with their own opinions, because I find that when you watch a debate, particularly online, it's very frustrating because it brings to mind lots of ideas about things, and you think, oh, this would be perfect to say to counter that point or to augment that point, and it can be frustrating, and therefore having it live means that people can watch it and actually take part in it and actually contribute points to the discussion.
Yeah, and the interactive side has a positive effect on us as well, because of course we're not just, it doesn't circulate around us, and we're kind of very familiar with our own positions on things. So having other parties weighing in, offering different angles is good for us.
So I suppose I may as well outline what I'll be arguing in particular. So I'll probably be arguing from a classical liberal, kind of libertarian sort of perspective, and I'll be looking at the kind of Austrian Chicago school of understanding economics. And I imagine you'll be coming at this from a very moral-only perspective. You're not necessarily going to be focusing too much on the...
It's a predominantly moralistic position that I'm going to be defending, yes. And I understand there are serious limitations to that and contradictions, which I'm sure we'll cross into. But nonetheless, that is the basis for why I believe that that free markets can't coexist with the universal good.
Well, I think before we get into it, it's probably worthwhile to actually define what a free market is. And I'm just going to pull up the Investopedia definition because I think it's a good definition. So it is as follows. The free market is an economic system based on supply and demand with little or no government control. It is a summary description of all voluntary exchange that takes place in a given economic environment. Free markets are characterized by spontaneous and decentralized order of arrangements through which make economic decisions. Based on political and legal rules, a country's free market economy can range between very large or entirely illegal. And one thing that I think is worth mentioning that is quite often avoided in definitions of free market policies and people who subscribe to the free markets is that the foundational principle of free market policies is that there is a principle that underlies it all, which is freedom. And this is something that is supported by other people, not just something that I put forward myself. For example, many objectivists who I believe we had a contemplations discussion about would subscribe to this view. And although I don't necessarily count myself as an objectivist per se, I do agree with them on this. And I want to talk about the free market with the principles of freedom as the ultimate goal in mind, because that is how I see the free market, and not just, you're free to do whatever you want, full stop.
I would readily agree that free markets are a natural extension of freedom proper that should be institutionally recognised. Where I think we actually disagree is how that has the potential to undermine freedom itself when taken to its absolutes. And I don't think there is something intrinsic about us that enables us to define what the limits are to economic freedom.
And I would like to add the caveat that often comes up that, absolute freedom doesn't mean, the freedom to kill with impunity, but a system that promotes freedom allows for the maximization of personal agency without disrupting the rights of other people. I think if you want a system that promotes freedom, it doesn't mean you allow the facilitation of people harming other people's ability to be free in the first place.
It's the classic Kantian position, really.
And just to kind of summarise about, just before we get into it, there are another key kind of summary points here from Investopedia that summarise some of the arguments put forward by free marketeers. So a free market is one where voluntary exchange and the laws of supply and demand provide the sole basis for an economic system without government intervention. So it's just allowing people to exchange goods and services without the government getting involved. I think we all understand this. And a key feature of free markets is the absence of coerced or forced transactions or conditions on transactions. And this is very, very important as well. And it acknowledges that while no pure free market economies actually exist and all markets are in some way constrained, economists who measure the degrees of freedom in markets have found a generally positive relationship between free markets and measures of economic well-being. And that takes us quite nicely into my positive case that not only are they not immoral, but they are actually a moral good. So imagine that there are a choice between two political systems. Obviously, this is a bit of a thought experiment. This isn't something that happens in real life. But system A makes people more materially wealthy, and system B keeps people's material wealth static. So you've got one that's pretty neutral. It doesn't really change people's wealth either way. And you've got one that makes people materially more wealthy. Which system would be better?
The first.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And of course, this is entirely obvious to anyone because many good things correlate with having more wealth, don't they?
Yes, although I would of course question that material wealth is more contingent than can be, I suppose, defined by economics on its own.
Mm-hmm. So you could also argue that giving people more material wealth is at least immoral because it can either be used for good or ill. However, I would say that the evidence seems to suggest that as people get more wealthy, they embody these sort of traits and behaviours that are actually more positive. So people are more likely to invest more money in giving their children a good education, for example. Wealthy people buy more healthy food. Wealthy people are more invested in their local communities. And also, rather good for us, I suppose, wealthy people tend to be more conservative because they want to keep the conditions in which they acquired their wealth the same because they don't want the possibility of losing it.
That's a very good description of the middle class. But what about those who have so much money, it quite clearly degenerates them? Like footballers, for example. Well, they have literally so much, they don't know what to do but buy a yacht, which sure, and this is again a moralistic position, could be better spent on, I don't know, a public hospital when they're just buying yachts for the sake of it. Doesn't the state surely have a duty to weigh in on that principle and say, you know what, Neymar, no, you don't need a gold yacht. This child cancer hospital needs it more.
Well, you could argue that this is his property, isn't it? It's money that he earned by doing a job that no one else can, and money
that centres around diving on television, and well, not actually for the most part being a fairly overrated footballer, given what was expected of him in his early days. I mean, for footballers like him, literally earn about £500,000 a week after tax. Do they really? I mean, do they really deserve that? The market itself suggests it does because there's so much money in football. I understand it rationalistically, but really, is it really a triumph of morality that footballers earn this much, or is it actually a suggestion that in fact, consumption actually degenerates us to think that spending that much on football is good?
But if there is the condition where people can earn this amount of money, where they are fulfilling a role where no one else can fill. Sure, we understand that football is a form of entertainment, and therefore it's not the same as saying, okay, well, this person is an engineer, therefore they deserve a very high salary because they're fulfilling a job which is very specialised. You want a high standard, and there aren't particularly many people that you want to fill it.
But large money in football means large levels of purchasing power, which means by extension more power to tell people that they should like football. So it's not entirely receptive. It isn't just because people are born and naturally like football. There are almost causal forces that lead you into taking that, making those cultural choices, if you like.
But this was already a cultural phenomenon that existed before there was lots of money in it, wasn't there? This was a popular sport before the money men moved in. And that's something worth bearing in mind. It's also worth bearing in mind that I've stopped following football these days, and it's possible to escape. It's not like it's forced on you. You're like, as soon as you're out of the womb, they like put a Manchester United shirt on you and a football, and like you haven't learned to walk yet, but come on, son, you're gonna.
Yeah, but if you happen to be watching a Sky channel, you can guarantee that during the advert break, you're probably going to receive, or at least encounter some adverts on the television about the Premier League fixtures at the weekend or something they're broadcasting, and it makes it more likely the more money you have to invest in it, which is of course.
Well, it allows them to promote their own product, but I mean, you've got to have a very negative view of being able to use your funds to, promote your own business, because don't all businesses do this anyway? And sure, it's not particularly a a pro-social industry per se, but then they are still providing entertainment, and the resources, the large amount of money that's being allocated is being allocated because no one else can fulfill the roles that they fill, and it's proportional to how good they are, isn't it? So the best get paid the most money, and that trend carries further down. And also they're of course getting, it's not just about how well they play as well, it's about the prestige of having good players that's good for the promotion of the team, getting people to watch. So it's an investment in a way.
That's a reflection of how football is now, but it's not how it was 50 years ago. And this brings me to another question. Do you think that football has got, in an aesthetic sense, better or worse since so much money has been poured into the game?
Well, I haven't. I'm not the right person to be asked because I haven't really followed it for, say, the 50 years.
And you also support Plymouth Argyle. You can't really see how the fruits of capitalism have actually benefited. the genuine benefits of incorporating capitalism into football.
They're my home team, but they're not exactly known for their world-renowned skill, are they?
You did draw with Real Madrid. What was it, a few years ago, didn't you?
Yeah, it was 1-1. Yeah. So there we go. Proof that money isn't everything. One of the best teams in the world drew to my home team. There we go.
I stand corrected on that one occasion.
Let's have a look at some of the chat. Football became ridiculously lousy as it became more professional. You guys are making me be immoral. Greetings from across the pond. I'm going to have a look at some of the comments below the video as well. But there we go. Student of History says 500k a month via market forces. Sounds like that market en masse has been...
A week.
Sounds like that market en masse has been degenerated into being a priority.
Where is that comment?
It's at the top. It was 2 minutes ago.
Is it? Oh, hang on. I think I might need to refresh the page. Hang on.
But yes, in that example, you can view them as entertainers, and people who are on television, you could say, well, someone who reads the news, anyone could do that. It's an easy job. You can replace them. However, their consistency, their reliability is what's being paid for. And I think that it's not that you should define their salary by their labour necessarily, not resort to the labour theory of value, because it's simply that the supply and demand forces dictate a price, a salary.
Well, that's the instrumental argument, and I know that is true, and that the reasons for them being paid as much as they are perfectly rational in that universe. I mean, Lionel Messi, for example, contributed a third of Barcelona's value whilst he was there, and actually got paid 8% of the club's worth or something. He could plausibly have asked for 3 million a week, or perhaps even more, but that's not the same thing as saying that he should. It just means that that's what that's the conclusion that you lead to, or that you get when you take market forces in and of themselves and assume that's rationality in and of itself.
At the core of this, you're basically using the word deserve, and that implies that there's some kind of morality that dictates what people deserve and what people don't. And this is something that is interesting when it comes to economics, because you could argue that, well, you could say that, sure, without people working on the supermarket checkouts, no one would be able to buy food, technically speaking, would they? So you could say, well, they're one of the most essential roles in the world, because you need people to buy food to do all the other jobs, therefore it's foundational. However, to suggest that they deserve footballers' salaries because it's such an important role, it doesn't make sense, because
no, but that claim would be rooted entirely from nothing, really. That would be an abstract claim. That wouldn't be an economic claim that would be making that's just as absurd as, well, for example, women working at Sainsbury's wanting to be paid exactly the same amount for someone who's doing an entirely different job in an entirely different department. I'd readily agree with you on that.
But we can actually, to use the football example, we could use the comparison of the American women's football teams wanting the same salary as the men's, even though no one watches their leagues, no one watches them play, which is where the money comes from. It's from the ad revenue, and that's why that exists in the first place, isn't it?
Yeah, well, do you know what I would have done? I would simply have reduced the wages of the men to make it equal. And they'd still be blimmin' minted, but I wouldn't actually do that. But.
I mean, it's one of those things where just the sheer amount of eyeballs inflates the cost, so it seems absurd. But I don't think it's necessarily one of those things where you can say, okay, this is immoral, because they're not really taking. You could, if you view it as a zero-sum game, which the economics isn't, but even if you viewed it in that way, you would argue that they're taking money from other entertainment industries because people are watching it as a form of entertainment, right? And therefore, it's not nearly as bad as posing it saying, okay, you can either have a yacht or you can have, a hospital, because really the trade-off is between different forms of entertainment rather than, say, you're going to give this money to watch some form of entertainment or a hospital, because people don't generally spend their leisure time donating to hospitals. That's
or some
a strange
might,
thing
but
to do.
they have strange taste.
If you would like to watch the rest of the live event videos, please go to lotuseaters.com.